Maya Richardson had never expected her life to be interrupted by something as trivial as a speeding ticket. She had spent the last 2 decades maintaining a low profile in her small hometown. Though she was well known in athletic circles, few in the town truly understood the depth of her achievements. Most people saw her as just another middle-aged woman, someone who walked her dog in the mornings, volunteered at the local youth center, and occasionally helped coach high school track athletes. But today, the rhythm of her morning jog was broken in the most mundane way. The police officer's car, with its flashing lights, appeared behind her as she slowed to a stop at a crosswalk. Maya instinctively knew that she hadn't been speeding. She kept a steady pace along the familiar neighborhood streets, mindful of the speed limits. Yet, as the officer approached her window, she couldn't shake the unease that settled in her stomach. Something about the interaction felt off, though she couldn't put her finger on it. The officer, a young man with a stern expression, tapped on her window. "Ma'am, you were exceeding the speed limit back there. I'm going to issue you a ticket." Maya's brows furrowed. "I'm sorry, officer, but I don't think that's right. I've been keeping the speed limit the whole time. Are you sure there's no mistake?" The officer didn't seem to hear her, or perhaps he wasn't interested in listening. His eyes never wavered from his notepad, and he scribbled down the details of the ticket, handing it to her with an unblinking gaze. "It's clear on my radar. You can dispute it in court, but for now, I'm issuing a citation." Maya was taken aback by how quickly he'd made up his mind. She tried to reason with him, explaining her morning routine and the fact that she had been paying attention to the road. Yet, the officer remained impassive. Maya could feel her frustration building, but she chose to keep calm. She had never been one to cause a scene, and she wasn't about to start now over something as small as a ticket. "Fine," she said, trying to maintain her composure. "I'll take it to court." The officer simply nodded and walked back to his patrol car, leaving Maya to stare at the ticket in her hand. She felt a flicker of indignation, not just because she'd been wrongly accused, but because something about the entire encounter felt dismissive, as if her presence, her very being, had been overlooked. To the officer, she was just another person to fine, just another name on a list. Shaking her head, Maya crumpled the ticket in her hand and tossed it onto the passenger seat. As she resumed her jog, she couldn't help but wonder what had led to this moment. Why had this young officer decided she was guilty before even asking the right questions? Had it been her appearance, or perhaps her quiet, unassuming nature? She'd never been one to make waves, but in that moment, she couldn't help but feel like she was being judged for something far beyond a simple traffic violation. It was as though her identity, everything she had worked for, had been erased in the blink of an eye. But what Maya didn't know was that this encounter was only the beginning of a much bigger story, one that would force both her and the community to confront assumptions, prejudices, and the power of recognition. The following week, Maya found herself walking into the local courthouse, the weight of the ticket still hanging over her. She had never expected her life to intersect with the judicial system in this way. She had always been the type to avoid drama, preferring to keep her accomplishments and personal life out of the spotlight. But now, with the looming court appearance, she couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was more significant than it seemed. The courthouse was a modest building, tucked away on the quieter side of town. It was a place where nothing much ever seemed to happen. The walls were lined with heavy oak paneling, and the air smelled faintly of old paper and dust. Maya had been here only once before, years ago, when she had helped coach a local high school debate team during their regional competition. This, however, felt different. She wasn't here as a mentor or a coach. She was here as a defendant, facing an accusation that she knew was wrong. The courtroom was surprisingly full for a minor traffic case. There were a few other people waiting for their cases to be heard. An older woman with a tired expression, a young man in a hoodie, and a couple of others all sitting in tense silence. Maya's heart rate picked up as she found a seat in the back, nervously adjusting her jacket. Her mind kept wandering back to the officer and the strange sense of dismissal she had felt when he handed her the ticket. Judge William Barnes entered the courtroom with the stern authority of a man who had seen it all. In his 50s, with gray hair neatly combed back and a pair of glasses perched on his nose, he had an air of indifference. His reputation preceded him. Judge Barnes was known for his no-nonsense attitude and strict rulings. Maya had heard of him in passing, but had never interacted with him directly. Today, she would see firsthand what kind of person he was. The gavel slammed down, and the room fell silent. "Court is now in session," Judge Barnes announced, his voice clear and commanding. He quickly scanned through the case files in front of him, barely glancing at the people in the room. His eyes were trained on the paperwork, and Maya could sense that he viewed this session as just another routine case. When her name was called, she stood up and walked to the front of the room. "Ms. Richardson, you're here to contest a speeding ticket issued on the 14th of this month. Do you acknowledge the violation?" Judge Barnes asked, not looking up from the papers on his desk. Maya hesitated for a moment, her voice steady but firm as she replied, "No, Your Honor. I don't believe I was speeding. I was following the speed limit the entire time." Judge Barnes glanced up at her, his expression unreadable. He didn't seem to be taking her words seriously. "You were clocked going 10 miles over the limit. The officer's report states you were traveling at 45 in a 35-mile zone." Maya felt a brief surge of frustration. She knew the officer had been wrong. She had been careful that day, keeping to the speed limit, but she had learned over the years that arguing wasn't always the solution. She took a deep breath and explained, "I was driving cautiously, and I don't believe I was speeding. I understand the officer's radar reading, but I would appreciate it if you would consider my side." Judge Barnes sighed, clearly not interested in further debate. "We'll keep this brief. I'm prepared to issue a fine, unless you can provide any evidence to dispute the ticket." Maya swallowed, her pulse quickening. There was no evidence to provide, just her word. She could feel the tension building in her chest. This was not how she envisioned spending her day. She had hoped for a fair hearing, a simple chance to explain, but the judge's dismissive tone made her wonder if that would ever happen. As the judge reached for his gavel to move forward with his decision, something strange happened. A murmur went through the courtroom. Maya's name, spoken in hushed whispers, seemed to hold more weight than she had anticipated. Her mind raced. Had someone recognized her? Had her reputation as an athlete preceded her into the courtroom? But she couldn't focus on that now. The judge's gavel was raised, and her fate seemed to be hanging in the balance. As Judge Barnes raised his gavel, the air in the courtroom shifted. It was a small sound, almost imperceptible, like a whisper passing through a crowded room. The clerk sitting at the side of the courtroom, an eager young woman with wide eyes and a curious smile, looked at Maya for a moment longer than usual. She quickly whispered to the person sitting beside her, but her voice was loud enough for those nearby to overhear. "Wait, is that Maya Richardson?" she muttered, her tone filled with surprise and recognition. Maya felt her pulse quicken at the mention of her name. She had always been a private person, preferring to keep her past as an Olympic athlete behind the scenes. But here, in this moment, she knew that the clerk had made the connection. The same name that had once dominated sports headlines, the same name that was etched into record books. It didn't take long for the whispers to ripple through the small, tight-knit room, growing louder with each passing second. One by one, the other court staff members started looking at Maya more closely. Her face was now familiar to them, though not in the way most people would have expected. They weren't recognizing her as the coach or the volunteer in the local youth programs, but as the legendary track and field athlete who had broken barriers decades ago. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and now Maya wasn't just a woman on trial. She was a symbol of achievement, a figure who had once commanded respect on an international stage. For a moment, Maya wondered if the attention would distract the court proceedings, but instead, it seemed to give them new weight. The courtroom, once filled with boredom and routine, suddenly became electric with curiosity. People who had been absent-mindedly fiddling with papers or tapping their phones now sat up straighter, their eyes fixed on her. The judge, who had been ready to issue a fine without hesitation, seemed to pause, as though the energy in the room had shifted completely. He lowered his gavel and glanced up, suddenly more aware of the presence in front of him. The clerk, realizing the significance of the moment, leaned forward in her seat and whispered something to the judge. "Your Honor, I believe Ms. Richardson isn't just any defendant. She's Maya Richardson, the Olympic gold medalist. She broke records in the 100 meters and the 200 meters. She's one of the greatest athletes this country has ever seen." The judge's eyes widened slightly as the realization hit him like a wave. He had heard of Maya Richardson before, of course, but he hadn't recognized her in the moment. He'd assumed she was just another local woman, caught in a routine traffic stop. But now, looking at her again, everything changed. His stern expression softened as he processed the situation. This wasn't just a simple case anymore. Maya wasn't just any citizen sitting before him. She was someone who had inspired millions, someone who had earned global recognition through years of hard work, sacrifice, and unmatched athleticism. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted from indifference to intrigue. Even the spectators who had been talking among themselves grew silent, their attention now entirely on the woman standing before them. Maya's heart pounded in her chest as she realized that this moment could be more than just about a traffic ticket. It could be a turning point, but how would the judge respond? There was a palpable silence as Judge Barnes placed his papers down slowly, his fingers tapping lightly on the wood of the bench as he processed what he had just learned. His voice, when he finally spoke, was quieter than before, with a hint of something like uncertainty. "Ms. Richardson," he said, his gaze shifting from the papers to her face, "I have to admit, I wasn't aware of your background. I apologize for my earlier haste." Maya's breath caught in her throat as the room seemed to hold its collective breath, waiting for the next move. Judge Barnes' words lingered in the air, and the entire courtroom seemed to pause, caught in a moment of unexpected realization. Maya stood silently, not quite sure how to react. She had always been someone who preferred to keep her past achievements private, allowing others to see her for who she was now. A coach, a mentor, a woman trying to make a difference in her community. But this moment felt different. It felt as if the past she had worked so hard to leave behind had resurfaced, demanding to be acknowledged. Judge Barnes took a deep breath, setting aside the case files in front of him. He adjusted his glasses and glanced up at her, his expression softer now, almost apologetic. The authority in his voice had given way to something more human, a mix of surprise and respect. "Ms. Richardson, I have to confess," he began, his tone more thoughtful, "I didn't recognize you when you first entered this courtroom. I've handled thousands of cases in my career, and I've learned to treat each one with fairness. But I must admit, I failed to do that today." Maya's stomach tightened. She hadn't expected an apology, and she wasn't sure how to respond to it. It wasn't often she was put in a position where her past achievements would influence how others saw her. The judge was clearly grappling with the realization that he had been quick to judge her, that he had let his assumptions cloud his understanding of who she truly was. The courtroom had gone deathly quiet. The young clerk, still wide-eyed, whispered something to a colleague beside her, but the murmurs in the room were barely audible, a mere undercurrent to the tension now hanging in the air. The spectators, who had once been disinterested, leaned forward as if drawn into the drama unfolding before them. Maya remained composed, though inside, she was processing a mix of emotions. Part of her wanted to stand up and tell the judge that it wasn't necessary to apologize. After all, this was just a traffic ticket, a minor incident. But another part of her felt something else, something deeper. For the first time in years, she was being seen not just as a woman trying to move on from her past, but as someone whose contributions had mattered. Someone whose identity wasn't just tied to her role in her community or her present life, but also to her legendary status as an athlete. "I didn't mean to make this about me," Your Honor, she finally said, her voice steady yet filled with an underlying emotion. This is just a misunderstanding, something that can be cleared up with the facts. I never wanted this to be more than it was. Judge Barnes nodded, his expression softening further as he regarded her. He had seen athletes, celebrities, and well-known figures in his courtroom before, but this was different. This was someone who had earned respect through hard work, someone who had put in decades of effort to achieve greatness. And now, here she was, standing before him, not as a celebrated athlete, but as a woman trying to defend herself against an unjust accusation. I understand, Ms. Richardson, he said quietly, leaning forward in his chair, but I also understand that I may have treated you unfairly. And I want to make this right. There was a brief silence as the weight of his words hung in the air. The courtroom, which had felt like a cold and impersonal space just moments before, now seemed to hum with a quiet intensity. Maya could sense the shift. The judge's willingness to acknowledge his error wasn't just about the ticket anymore. It was about something deeper, an understanding that sometimes we fail to see the full picture. And in this case, Maya had become more than just a name on a piece of paper. Judge Barnes sat back in his chair, his fingers tapping thoughtfully on the desk. The room waited, hanging on his next words. Judge Barnes took a long moment to gather his thoughts, the weight of the situation settling in. His reputation for decisiveness had always been his strength, but now he found himself in unfamiliar territory. The woman standing before him wasn't just another defendant. She was someone who had defied the odds, someone whose name was synonymous with excellence in sports, and now he had failed to recognize her, treating her with the same indifference he reserved for minor cases. The room remained silent, the tension palpable as he considered his next move. The clerk, still wide-eyed, shifted in her seat, clearly anxious to see how the judge would handle this newfound knowledge. The spectators in the gallery watched, sensing that this case was about to take a turn none of them had expected. Maya, meanwhile, remained calm, her eyes focused on the judge, waiting for what would come next. Finally, Judge Barnes looked up, his gaze meeting hers. His expression was no longer stern or dismissive, but instead it was filled with a mix of humility and genuine respect. "Ms. Richardson," he began, his voice softer than before, "I owe you an apology, one that goes beyond this ticket. I let my assumptions cloud my judgment today, and I regret that. I've seen many cases in my time, but I've never had the honor of hearing from someone like you." Maya's heart skipped a beat. She had never expected this. She had walked into the courtroom with the intention of clearing up a simple misunderstanding, but now the proceedings had turned into something much more significant. The apology felt like more than just a gesture. It was an acknowledgement of who she was, not just in the context of the ticket, but in the broader sense of her life and achievements. Maya wasn't sure how to respond. She hadn't expected to be recognized in this way, especially not by someone like Judge Barnes, a figure of authority who had once seemed so distant and unapproachable. "I can't begin to imagine the challenges you've faced throughout your career and the sacrifices you've made," Judge Barnes continued, his voice steady but tinged with sincerity. "You didn't deserve to be treated like any other defendant in this courtroom. This fine, it should never have been issued in the first place." Maya felt a lump form in her throat. She hadn't expected the judge to acknowledge her past, let alone speak so openly about her challenges. She had spent most of her life trying to distance herself from her athletic persona, but in that moment, she realized that her achievements were still an important part of who she was. They weren't just a thing of the past. They had shaped her, and in many ways, they had brought her to this very moment. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen, Your Honor," Maya finally said, her voice calm but tinged with emotion. "I've never wanted my past to overshadow who I am today. But I do appreciate your recognition." The judge nodded, clearly moved by her response. "You've earned more than just respect in this community, Ms. Richardson," he said, his voice firm now. "You've earned a place in history, and I'm going to make sure that you're treated with the respect you deserve, starting right here, right now." Without hesitation, Judge Barnes turned to the clerk. "Please void the fine," he instructed, "and I want a public apology issued for the mishandling of this case." The clerk quickly nodded, already working to adjust the paperwork. Maya felt a strange sense of relief wash over her, but there was something deeper as well, something she hadn't expected. It was the acknowledgement, the understanding that she was more than just a face in the crowd, more than just a woman caught in a routine mistake. This was a recognition that she had earned through years of hard work, perseverance, and sacrifice. As the judge turned his attention back to Maya, there was a sense of finality in his words. "Ms. Richardson, this case is dismissed, and I sincerely apologize for any inconvenience this may have caused you." The courtroom, once filled with quiet tension, now felt lighter. The spectators, who had been witnesses to an unexpected turn of events, seemed to release a collective breath. Maya's story had resonated, and it wasn't just about a ticket anymore. It was about understanding, respect, and the power of recognition. For the first time that day, Maya smiled, her heart a little lighter, knowing that the judge's words had meant something more than just the resolution of a small petty matter. They had acknowledged who she truly was. As Maya left the courtroom, a sense of calm settled over her. The ordeal had been resolved, the ticket dismissed, and the apology issued. It should have been over, a simple end to a small misunderstanding. Yet, as she stepped out into the bright afternoon sun, she realized that this experience had sparked something much bigger than she had anticipated. The news of her encounter with Judge Barnes spread like wildfire through the community. In the days that followed, Maya found herself at the center of conversations everywhere she went. The local coffee shop, the grocery store, even the youth center where she volunteered. It seemed that everyone had heard about her court case, and most people were talking about it with a new sense of reverence. The story of the legendary athlete being wrongly fined, only to have her past acknowledged by the judge, had become a topic of local interest. At first, Maya felt uneasy with all the attention. She had never been someone who sought the spotlight, especially not in her small town where people often knew too much about one another. She had always preferred to blend in, to be seen as just another part of the community rather than as a figure from the past. Yet, as people approached her to share their thoughts or offer congratulations, she began to realize that something important was happening. She wasn't just being recognized as the athlete she once was. She was being seen as a person, someone whose life had been marked by both achievements and challenges. It was as if the walls between her past and present had finally come down. One afternoon, Maya was at the local track, watching a group of high school athletes she had been coaching. They were preparing for an upcoming regional competition, and Maya was offering tips and encouragement, as she always did. As she watched the students race, her attention was drawn to a young girl, Emily, who had been struggling to break her personal best in the 100-meter sprint. Maya had seen potential in Emily from the start, a quiet determination, a fierce will to improve. But today, Emily was frustrated, clearly feeling the weight of her own self-doubt. Maya approached her, a gentle smile on her face. "Emily," she said, crouching down to meet her at eye level. "What's going on? I can see you've got it in you." Emily sighed, wiping sweat from her forehead. "I just can't do it. Every time I push harder, I feel like I hit a wall. I don't know if I'll ever make it to the level I want." Maya nodded, her heart going out to the young girl. She had felt that same frustration many times before, back in the days when she was training for the Olympics. The pressure to be perfect, the fear of falling short. It was something every athlete faced. "You know," Maya said softly, "when I was your age, I felt that same way. There were days when I thought I wasn't good enough. But the thing that helped me the most was realizing that it's okay to have setbacks. It's not the fast times that matter the most. It's the persistence, the belief that you can keep getting better." Emily looked up, a spark of hope in her eyes. "You really think so?" Maya smiled, the memories of her own struggles flooding back. "I know so. Just keep pushing. You've already come so far, and you'll go even further if you believe in yourself." As she spoke, Maya realized that this was her true purpose, not just to coach, but to inspire. The court case, the apology, the recognition in the community, it had all led her to this moment. She wasn't just reliving the glory of her past. She was using that experience to shape the future, not just for herself, but for the young athletes who, like Emily, were still finding their way. The ripple effect of her brief encounter with the law had brought her back to her roots. It reminded her of the strength she had as a role model, of the power of perseverance, and of the importance of being seen, not just for what one has achieved, but for the person one is. As Emily took her mark for another race, Maya watched, knowing that the impact of that one conversation would stay with her long after the final lap was run. As the weeks passed, Maya's life continued to settle back into a rhythm, but the effects of that one courtroom encounter rippled through her community in ways she hadn't imagined. People began to view her differently, not just as a former athlete, but as someone who had a deeper connection to their lives. The story of her case with Judge Barnes spread beyond the local track, reaching the town's schools, community centers, and even the local media. Maya had become a symbol of humility and perseverance, someone who had remained grounded despite the fame she had once known. The local newspaper published a short piece on her, framing the story not as a tale of a minor traffic violation, but as a story of rediscovery. The headline read, "Local legend defends more than her speed. A lesson in humility and hard work." It wasn't just about her Olympic medals, but about her commitment to giving back to the community, about her quiet strength, and about how she had never let the past define her. The article portrayed Maya not as a hero, but as a relatable woman who had made her mistakes, just like everyone else, and was still working to better herself. Maya hadn't asked for any of this attention, but as she read the article, she began to realize that perhaps this was the moment she had needed all along. The attention she had shied away from for years was now becoming a vehicle for positive change. People from all walks of life were approaching her, sharing stories about how her story had inspired them. Some told her about their own struggles, whether with fitness, work, or personal issues. Others simply wanted to thank her for reminding them that perseverance and humility were virtues worth striving for, no matter the circumstances. One evening, a few weeks after the court case had been resolved, Maya was walking through town when she was stopped by a local teacher, Mrs. Thompson, from the middle school. Mrs. Thompson had been one of the first people to recognize Maya in the courtroom, and since then, she had been following her story with great interest. "Maya, I've been meaning to speak with you," Mrs. Thompson said, her voice warm. "I'm working with a group of students who could really benefit from hearing your story. They're struggling with motivation, and I know your journey could inspire them." Maya felt a mix of surprise and humility. She hadn't expected her story to reach the classrooms, but now it was clear that her role in the community was shifting. "I'd be honored to speak with them," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "If I can make even a small difference, I'll do it." Over the next month, Maya found herself not just coaching on the track, but also speaking at local schools and community events. She shared her experiences of triumph, failure, and the countless hours spent training for something bigger than herself. She spoke about the pressure she had felt, the doubts she had battled, and how she had overcome them by sticking to her values, by remembering that her worth wasn't tied to a single race or a medal. Each time she spoke, she saw the faces of the young people in the crowd light up. They were listening, hanging on to every word, not just because she was a famous athlete, but because her message resonated deeply with them. Maya wasn't just teaching them about running or sports. She was teaching them about life. Her efforts weren't just impacting the younger generation either. Even adults in the community started opening up to her about their own struggles, about how they had once been afraid to chase their dreams or face their fears. Maya had become a beacon of hope, not because of her Olympic medals, but because of her unshakable belief that anyone could rise above their challenges with persistence and grace. The community had transformed too. People were more supportive of one another, more willing to share their stories and offer encouragement. It wasn't just about athleticism anymore. It was about resilience, shared strength, and the realization that everyone had something valuable to offer. Maya's unexpected encounter with the law had sparked a movement in her small town, one that wasn't just about correcting a mistake, but about healing, growth, and the power of personal connection. As the months passed, Maya began to see the full impact of her actions. What started as a simple misunderstanding in a courtroom had sparked a chain of events that transformed not only her life, but also the lives of many in her community. The unexpected attention had made her reflect on the true value of her story, not as an athlete, but as a person who had faced challenges, learned from them, and emerged stronger. Maya's public talks, once a rare occasion, had turned into a regular part of her life. She spoke at local schools, leadership programs, and even community organizations. She shared her journey from Olympic glory to finding purpose in coaching and mentoring young people. Each time, her words resonated with her audience in new ways, reminding them that success wasn't always measured by trophies or headlines, but by the courage to keep going, no matter the obstacles. One afternoon, she was invited to speak at a youth leadership conference, a program aimed at empowering teenagers to reach their full potential. As she stood in front of a room full of bright-eyed students, Maya couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. This was her true legacy. The past, the Olympic medals, the recognition. They were important, but it was these moments of connection, of making a difference in someone else's life, that truly mattered. A few days later, Judge Barnes called her. It had been a while since the courtroom incident, and though they had spoken briefly after the case was dismissed, Maya hadn't expected to hear from him again. "Ms. Richardson," his voice came through the phone. "I hope you're doing well. I've been following your story, and I just wanted to tell you that it's been inspiring to see how you've handled everything. What you've done for the community is incredible. I'm proud of how you've turned something so small into a positive force." Maya smiled, touched by his words. "Thank you, Judge. Honestly, I never expected any of this. It's been a humbling experience, but I'm glad I've been able to help, even in small ways." "You've done more than help, Maya," he said, his tone warm. "You've shown people that second chances matter, and that none of us are defined by just one moment in time." The conversation stayed with her long after she hung up. She had spent so many years distancing herself from her past, from the fame and accolades that had once defined her. But now, in the wake of the incident with Judge Barnes, she realized that she didn't need to run from it. She had the power to use it, to teach others that they could create their own paths forward, no matter where they had come from. Her efforts were now being recognized not just locally, but on a broader scale. Community leaders, educators, and even local businesses reached out to her, asking how they could collaborate to continue the work she had started. Maya had become the face of perseverance, resilience, and change. She wasn't just the Olympic champion from the past, but a woman who had found her true calling in helping others. One afternoon, Maya was walking through the local park when she saw Emily again, the young runner she had mentored. Emily was in the middle of her warm-up, preparing for a big race. Maya paused and watched her for a moment, admiring the determination in her stride. Emily saw her and waved, jogging over. "I did it, Ms. Richardson," Emily said, breathless with excitement. "I finally broke my personal best, and I'm not stopping here. I've got big goals now." Maya smiled, feeling a swell of pride. "I knew you had it in you, Emily. You just needed to believe." As they talked, Maya realized that this moment, this connection with Emily, was the culmination of everything she had been working toward. She wasn't just teaching technique. She was teaching the power of belief, of resilience, and of community. Her past, once something she tried to leave behind, had come full circle, helping her build something much more meaningful than she could have imagined. For Maya, the courtroom incident had been a turning point, but it was the lessons learned along the way that would shape her future. She had gone from an athlete with a past to a mentor with a purpose, helping others find their own strength in a world that sometimes underestimated them. And in that, she had found her true legacy.